You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know before the show starts, we've got my good friend, Delegate Pat McGeehan from the 2nd Best Virginia, West Virginia, on the show today. And we're talking a lot of stuff, everything from Roman history to some books that Pat wrote, and everything's going to go ahead and be in the show notes today. So I just want to let you know that up front, so that way we can jump into it and have a good time. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Prepare yourself. You're on the run with Remso W. Martinez.
All right, Pat McGeehan, it's been a minute since we last spoke. How's it going?
Good. How you been?
I've been better. I don't know when this episode is coming out. I'm hoping that's a little bit after the whole coronavirus situation has ended, but I got a quick story for you. The Washington Times, we shut down our building like months ago at this point. Now we're going on, day 60 past Judgment Day. And we've got a guy, he's our media coordinator, George Gerbo. He's actually I think he's from your district that you represent. So like the day that Northern Virginia and DC started getting coronavirus people coming in, because apparently when you have coronavirus, what do? You fucking go everywhere. He ran to West Virginia. So we're on a Zoom call with our marketing.
Did this guy bring the corona here? Is that it?
Well, we were thinking that first, but everyone thought
I'm
that
I blame this guy regardless for all my troubles for 6 weeks.
Things are not. I mean, things are kind of tying up. But like his argument, we were on a Zoom call about a week later. His argument was, listen, when shit hits the fan, you go to West Virginia. We've been saying this since the Cold War. We've been saying this since ever. Just go there because no one wants to invade it. Nobody's going to bomb it. You're safe.
Nobody wants to do business here.
I kid you not. Within a day, I turn on TV. Fox News comes on. I see Jim Justice on TV. Next thing you know, it's like West Virginia has their first coronavirus case. Oh, geez. And now we're all looking at him. So it's been, we've been able to find humor throughout all of this, but now not even West Virginia is safe.
Yeah, you're right about the whole Cold War in West Virginia with the Greenbrier, because full circle, if you're familiar with the I don't know what it was officially called, but they had a little bunker basement you could still visit at the Greenbrier Resort in southern West Virginia, where they would evacuate the government from Washington, D.C., in the 50s and 60s. And presumably, to the middle of nowhere, West Virginia, because it was more safe. But
now they throw everybody in Mount Weather.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
Jim
Justice owns the Greenbrier Resort now.
What? So he's basically set.
Well, he's been having some financial problems as of late, but
didn't he get his Trump bucks? Did he get his Jerome Powell money?
I think we did get a few $1 billion. The state government did anyway. I think did the federal government pull that out of their savings account? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because they're so great at having that rainy day.
Or was it a printing press?
Of course it's him. It's Jerome Powell with the freaking printer, just like his eyes are bleeding. Just, it's been more people. I've never seen so many people tweet about the Federal Reserve now than ever before. And, not to say it's the sexiest of topics, but when I'm having people who I've never discussed politics with or nonetheless monetary policy suddenly saying, we could just print our way out of this and maybe we should just print away our debt. I'm like, I'm ready for it to end. Send in the murder hornets, send in Corona Wave 2. Like, I'm ready. Like, I'm good at this.
Scary. That is scary. It's, it's scary in the short run because the left has been preaching, obviously this more heavy expansionary type government policies, and they're never able to answer the question, well, how are you going to pay for them? And So given our recent experience here with this panic, and I just read a report where the federal debt and borrowing, which is just monetizing the debt in the second quarter, is going to hit $3 trillion. It seems like they don't have to answer that question anymore. How are you going to pay for this? Well, nobody on the right in Congress really, except for a couple, are asking that question. So it's an unfair question. Which is a little nervous.
I mean, printing money, especially right now, has been truly a bipartisan victory for a lot of people, because they're just like, look what I was able to go ahead and bring back to my state and everything else. I mean, of course, you had Ted Cruz say, well, I didn't want to do it, but we got to bail out the American people. Then you have Rand Paul, and everyone thought he was dying, so nobody listened to him. And you've got Mitch McConnell basically saying, we'll just do what needs to be done. It's like, that's a very lazy answer.
Yeah.
It's not like
I like Rand. He needs to shave the beard though. I mean, you're like, just to go along with what you're saying. I mean, it seems like he, I'm like, man, come on. I mean, I understand maybe you're trying a different look, but
it's like the mark of survival at this point.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, that's a good segue right into our topic tonight. But come on. If you're coming out of the presumable, if you're coming off your sick bed, before you take mic time, maybe you should shave, but whatever.
This is truly one of those times where we're going to look at this a few years from now. And I think a lot of people are going to say, I would rather us overreact than underreact. But that's such an armchair quarterback statement. And, I was on a few podcasts and a radio show and a live stream. Now, since everyone is at home, everyone wants to do everything now. So they invite me on because they ran out of interesting people. And it's so funny because, like, depending on where I'm at.
If you're the uninteresting guy when you're a guest and I'm your guest.
Just be happy. Just be happy. Don't think about it. Just take the ticket, right. Enjoy the ride. Okay. But, depending on where I go, I'm either on the left wing bench or the right wing bench. And, and more often than not, I've been taking the Republican seat more often. And I've got these liberals just screaming about these absolutely totalitarian policies. It's like, Trump's a fascist, but how dare he not take full control? And, these people are, going after minority communities. How are they supposed to survive if they're indoors? And that's like, shoot everyone on site who's outdoors, not wearing a mask. And, it's been one of those moments where even if I were to come up with a very pithy answer about things, I've gotten tired about it. And more often now than ever, I've just been telling people I don't have an answer, and anyone that says they have an answer as to how to unilaterally fix this is probably lying, because the only thing we can do is really evaluate how we as individuals are going to come out as stronger or weaker. And this is what ultimately brings us into our topic, because, people will be talking about coronavirus until, 4 horsemen come and sectarian violence in the Middle East ends. But, when we met in 2018, I knew that you had this reputation for being a practicing Stoic. And honestly, I had not heard that since college, and I rarely went to classes. So my knowledge of it was essentially non-existent. And then I got a copy of your book, Stoicism in the Statehouse, a few months after that, and I read it, and it started getting gears turning. And I put it down, think about it for a while. And then over the past couple months, it seems to have made more of a comeback for people, especially as I think more of the American population are withdrawing from paying attention to the rustle and bustle of what goes on in D.C. And working in D.C., especially in a newsroom, for me, I become desensitized to a lot of things. I hear the bullshit all day. So what I did was I picked up your book again, but around halfway through it, I'm like, I feel like I would be better if I went back and read some other stuff. So I picked up one of your favorite books, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And I have to tell you, other than probably the Holy Bible itself, that book has had probably the most profound impact on me since I read it. And I got the audiobook version of it so I could listen to it again than probably any other book. And this is one of those things where I think it's, once you really understand the Stoic mindset, there is really no going back, because you're going to find yourself wrestling with these thoughts all the time. For those of those listening who don't know about your story and how you started really trying to jump into the world of Stoic philosophy, how did that start? When did that start?
So I was trying to deal with, I'd always had some issues from my childhood and from the service that, I was always trying to sort of, I guess, grapple with. I call them my past demons. And once I got into the legislature, the adversity there led me to start thinking about some sort of philosophy, a philosophy of life, really, to confront the adversity. So I knew in the legislature how to apply logic and solve the practical problem of policy. So how to make decisions on policy just from reading classical political philosophy, Austrian economics, things probably your listeners are well acquainted with. And that's all fine and good. But how do you conduct yourself in implementing that policy was something that was left unanswered in my mind. And that, combined with what I was just sort of telling you about with my personal life, my personal experiences from my youth and from my younger years, I just and I have a tendency to read a lot. So that's, to make a long story short, what led me into Stoic philosophy. Actually, I was trying to do some research to write a book. This is going back 7 or 8 years ago, and I kept coming across a guy named Epictetus, who I only briefly remembered hearing about in college. And I started reading more and more about him, and that led me to guys like Marcus Aurelius and others. And so I put down, I can't remember really the book I was working on. I put that aside, said, okay, I'm going to focus on this. But that harkened back the exposure I had to Stoicism, and it was just a very brief exposure when I was in college. I clearly remembered it from one day in like a philosophy 101 class I was forced to take, and it might have been half an hour of the lecture, if that. And the only reason why I really remember it so clearly was because I also had met the guy that was discussed in this lecture in my philosophy class, I believe just a few months before the class, before that day I'm telling you about. And it was Admiral James Stockdale, who was aside from being a practicing Stoic, he was a war hero, a Medal of Honor winner, and he was a prisoner of war in North Vietnam for something like 7.5 years. And he was the Navy's senior ranking officer in the Hanoi Hilton, which is what the aviators gave to as a nickname to that infamous POW prison camp. And he was tortured dozens of times. He withstood 4 years of solitary confinement. But right before he was shot down or had deployed, basically to his he was a pilot, a commander of a carrier squad, an aviation wing on a carrier. Before he deployed to Vietnam, he went to graduate school at Stanford. And while he was at Stanford getting his degree, he was in his late 30s. He was exposed to Stoic philosophy and took an immediate liking to it. And in his memoirs, I can't remember the name of them. They're not really memoirs. It's a short paper he wrote. I think it's called Courage, Testing the Epictetus's Doctrine in the Laboratory of Human I can't remember. It's some long.
That's a mouthful already.
Yeah, I can't remember it. But anyway, I want to say Courage Under Fire, but I think that's just a movie I remember with Megan. Whatever. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. But bottom line is, he was parachuting into North Vietnam after he got shot down, and he literally told himself he's leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. And so Epictetus was the Stoic philosopher in the 2nd century, right prior to Marcus Aurelius's generation. And what's interesting is Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, those two guys are, other than Seneca, those guys are what we have the most about from Stoic literature.
Seneca, and we might be getting a bit ahead. Seneca, I found out he was a slave, and a lot of his actual, a lot of his proverbs and a lot of his wisdom was written down by other people. So, like, there's no actual.
That's Epictetus, actually.
That's Epictetus.
Yeah,
okay.
Epictetus was the slave, and that's really cool. The dichotomy you got between Epictetus, the slave, and Marcus Aurelius, an emperor. That's really cool. Seneca was Nero's right-hand guy.
That's it. Yeah.
But Seneca, we have the most Stoic literature from Seneca that survives today. But so you got Seneca, you've got Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and then you have some fragments from Musonius Rufus, who was Epictetus's first-rate teacher in Rome ahead of him. We have some fragments from him. Other than that, we have we have some stuff from, I think, Zeno of Citium, who was the founder of the Stoic school, and then
wasn't he homeless?
I believe so. I think tradition has it that he was shipwrecked in Athens or on the Greek mainland. He was an Easterner from Asia Minor, I think.
And that's I only bring that up because everyone that we've mentioned, just when you look at how they lived their lives, it's remarkable that even then we are still talking about them now.
Yeah.
And I think that says something about the fact that people, whether they were slaves or whether they were emperors, whether they were college professors or whether they were construction workers, this has been able to persist beyond them.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. Yeah, it's a testament of the power of the philosophy, I think, really, the ideas that they bring forth, because it's very practical. Before Stoicism, you had the two Greek giants, Plato and Aristotle. And those guys covered, Aristotle is arguably the world's first scientist. So they covered broad areas of knowledge. By the time Stoicism comes about, the Stoics are focused on practicality. They really want to take philosophy and just apply it to their everyday life. And that's what they're really focused on. And it's interesting that you say that Stoicism is making some sort of, resurgence, or people are at least interested in it right now with everything going on now with the adverse times we're living in. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I'll take your word for it. But Stoicism itself came about in an era of great adversity and of great worry and concern and fear, because prior to Stoicism's sort of, birth in 300 BC, earlier on in the 4th century BC, you had the Peloponnesian War, where the Greek city-states basically destroyed each other between Sparta and their allies and the Athenians. And then in the wake of that, Alexander the Great emerges from Macedonia, and he comes from the north down through the Greek peninsula and subjugates all the Greek city-states who were once, the polis, the great Greek city-state, and they're just basically in ruins. And then, of course, Alexander the Great's empire collapses and splinters up after his death in, I think, 323 BC. So some 2 decades after Alexander the Great's empire is destroyed, there's so much turbulence. That's when Stoicism starts developing. So I don't think that's a coincidence either. I think people were probably just like today, uncertain times.
And I mean, the thing that always confused me about it was my biggest struggle. I think this will be my lifetime struggle because I'm always each time I think I find an answer or something, I always end up coming up with 20 other questions about it. My eternal struggle that I'm probably going to die still struggling with is establishing a consistent worldview, because, growing up, so I grew up raised in a culturally Christian family, went to, Baptist private school. I was given a lot of the prosperity gospel. If you're good, then God's going to reward you. Then I hit my teens, and like every other teen, what do? If I'm already kind of edgy about that, I give up the Bible and I pick up Ayn Rand. And then I'm, preaching the fountainhead and stuff like that. Then years later, I had my own, conversion back to Christianity. And over the last couple of years, it's been, developing and understanding and applying a Christian worldview to things. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. And I'm not going to preach to people what they should believe and how they should believe. But if you don't have a consistent worldview as to understanding who you are, what is your purpose, and what is the function of life itself, you're going to have a lot of problems with many things. And, I went to Liberty University, and, I dealt with a lot of different people. I had friends who were Catholic. I had friends who were, Bible Belt evangelicals. And while they all had good ideas about stuff, it was trying to understand my place in all of it. So my initial, adverse reaction to Stoicism was, it's just another mindset type of thing. It's another, believe the power of the triangle, Tony Robbins type of thing, except now we're talking about Greeks instead of all these other folks that are just telling you just have to think positive and positive things will happen, and what you determine is going to happen is what's going to manifest. So I just kind of wrote it off like that. But when you really jump into it, it's less about, making bad situations good. It's more about understanding that bad things are going to happen. How you react to it is a choice. And I think that's where even a lot of these, mindset coaches online and on TV, they're very anti-stoic in that sense, because they're like, well, if bad things happened, then you obviously allowed it to happen, and, you need to try harder. With Marcus Aurelius, he mentions, I do not think this was in Meditations. I think I heard this somewhere else about him, but basically, when he was emperor, before him and his legions went off to fight, he wanted to see how his people would react to the simplest of adverse situations. So he put a boulder in the middle of the city street, and he wanted to see how people were going to react to it. Were they going to go home? Were they going to try and break it down? Were they going to try and go around it? Were they going to basically let that boulder be the thing that stopped them from going and doing what they had to do that day? And he apparently he camped out on like a hill with a few guards and just watched people for nights. I mean, he was just disappointed because each time he thought somebody was actually going to do something, to actually get past the boulder, they would just quit and go home. What he ended up doing was he got a sack of coins, and he wrote a letter, and he put it under, he was able to somehow slide underneath the boulder. So apparently he goes home, and the next day, this one dude basically gets a couple of his friends, and they just push the boulder. Somebody took the opportunity and was like, hey, I'm going to be a leader in the situation. Let's push the boulder. So they get it off the path, and the guy finds, a bag full of gold and a letter from the freaking emperor. And, to kind of paraphrase it, and I'm totally screwing this up because my memory is shit. But, right. Marcus is basically like, listen, there are going to be obstacles in life, that is guaranteed. But the obstacle that is in the way is the way.
Yeah, that's Ryan Holiday, right? The obstacle is the way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, just listening to that story, I had to kind of, think about it, because I'm like, you know what? Whether that was something that actually happened or whether that's just a legend that comes from, time itself, there's something so true about that. Because I think often we believe that we are owed great lives of comfort, that if you're a good person, only good things should happen. So whether it's through, religion or just our secular society, bad things happen to bad people. It's very lazy logic that still persists. But that concept of, it's going to happen, you have a choice as to how you will let it affect you. That does the one thing that I don't think many people want to do. It puts it puts the whole target on you.
Right.
And
it's not what happens to us, but how you react to it that matters. That's Epictetus in a nutshell. Right. And you're right. And I guess I'll add a few things in the way of Marcus Aurelius and how what he saw can relate to us today. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, like already, as a journal to himself. But when he was writing it, he was on the front, fighting Germanic tribes, on the edges of the frontier, and he was exposed to, death constantly. And if you notice some very dark themes, if you read it for the first time, you come away with, whoa, some of this is a little dark.
I mean, he was not writing that thinking, oh, this can become a New York Times bestseller.
No,
that was his freaking diary. That was his journal.
Yeah. So he was really focused on one aspect of Stoicism, and that is ensuring you're very acutely aware of your own mortality. And you can pick that theme up constantly through his Meditations. And I think today, when we're going through this coronavirus crisis, or really it's fear that's driving a lot of this, people are or have not been exposed to the thought anyway of their own mortality, or at least they're not very comfortable with it. And that's part of Stoic philosophy
that people really try and shoot down. It's just not something that nobody ever wants to talk about it.
Right. And the Stoics, they didn't not only wanted to talk about it, they wanted to constantly focus on it. And one way to phrase it now is negative visualization. And Admiral Stockdale will talk about this in some respects. And he was able to wither all those years as a POW by embracing Epictetus and guys like Marcus Aurelius. And negative visualization is pondering or thinking about the worst that could happen to you today, the worst that could happen to you in the near term or in the long term, however you want to look at it. It's a practice you can perform mentally. And then figuring out ways that you could rationally cope with the worst that could happen. And then what you usually find is that you've exaggerated the possibilities that could happen to you to begin with. And even if the worst were to happen, you've already come to peace with figuring out, how you're going to, personally deal with it. And so it's it might work for some people. It works for me for the most part. But in some respects Marcus Aurelius was focusing on his own mortality, because he might have been slaughtered by barbarians on the frontier, and that was probably the worst that could have happened to him. So,
yeah, I mean, he gets such a bad rep for being the guy that brought the plague back home. And I mean, I think a lot of people who might even have known his name but don't know anything about him remember him as the guy that set up all the bad things to happen in Gladiator with Russell Crowe. But I mean, this is a dude. He gets the reputation for being one of the last actual good emperors of Rome. But then you look at
Niccolo Machiavelli's discourses on Livy. He calls the last five good emperors, and Marcus Aurelius is the last.
Okay, so I wasn't just combining things and making that up.
No,
See, I'm retaining things, but I mean, just a brief overlook of his life. I mean, he his wife is potentially cheating on him all the time. His stepbrother, who's like his co-emperor, is, he's just a philanderer. He's a terrible person to have co-leading Rome. One of his best friends tells everyone one night while Marcus is out of town or something that, the emperor is dead and he's the emperor. And then when Marcus comes back, he kills himself. And then he's dealing with these constant wars. And then towards the latter years of Marcus's life, he's dealing with the Antonine plagues, which lasted like 13 years. I mean, if you want to talk about somebody who inherited like the worst possible scenario, I mean, that's a Netflix series all in itself. But when it comes to what you just mentioned, one thing that I do remember him saying in meditations was, ask yourself, what is the worst thing I can imagine? What is so big that I cannot endure it? Once you come to that, visualization, you're going to realize how embarrassed you are, because a lot of people, and I think, it's so funny. We are truly a blessed country despite our problems and things. We live in a very comfortable point of not only the world right now, but just of human history. We're incredibly blessed. And we have increased levels of depression. We have increased levels of anxiety. A lot of millennial men will now say that they don't feel that their lives have purposes. And ultimately, I think a lot of the fears we have, and this is something I've definitely experienced. And, I'm pretty open about it, folks. Like, it took years of therapy to understand this. Anything that can go on in my mind is almost always going to be worse than what a situation actually is. And I think the problem that a lot of people don't grasp about Stoicism, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, is they think it's like all these other things. It's like, just manifest better things. It's ultimately comes down to bad things will happen. There will be obstacles. What you do because of that is ultimately what's going to be the ultimate judgment call. Because one thing that I've had to do during this period at home, I'm lucky. I get to work from home. But, the Stoics don't tell you to compare misery or something like that. They don't tell you to compare. They just say, focus on improving yourself as a person. And during this time, I've had to really ask myself, eventually this is going to end. We have to go back to work. I have to go out and do regular shit like everyone else. But during this extra time I have to myself, I can either have left the situation being improved, I could stay the same, or I could be worse off. I could be constantly watching TV. I could be constantly looking for all the new updates on Google. I could be arguing with people about, what Trump is doing right or what Trump is doing wrong. I have ultimately no control over any of this. I can only control my own direct outcome.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely, you hit the nail on the head. The one thing that drew me to the Stoic philosophy, and I think one of the core principles of it, is the dichotomy of control, which Epictetus outlines in the first line of his handbook, which is called the Enchiridion. And you alluded to Epictetus earlier on, I think, but you just conflated Seneca with Epictetus.
I'm confusing all the guys with the Latin name.
That's easy to do. But you're right in the respect of Epictetus never actually wrote anything down. It was his student Arrian that wrote his discourses down, which are basically lectures that his teacher Epictetus taught. And so there was originally 8 books in the discourses, only 4 survived. And then a summation of all those 8 books condensed in a little pamphlet that Arrian also wrote called the Enchiridion, which from Greek is usually translated as manual or handbook. And in the first line, it's focus on what's up to you. Some things are up to us, some things are not. Essentially, focus on what's within your control and discount what's not within your control. And so that's the dichotomy of control. You have ultimately control over only what you think, basically. And those your thoughts are ultimately the one thing that is entirely under your control. And it is your thoughts that generate the negative passions. So if you have the wrong thoughts, then you will generate negative thoughts, generate negative actions usually, and you're going to start demonstrating the vices. And so the Stoics were very, very exceptional with regard to virtue. They ultimately wanted to pursue virtue over everything, and they elevated virtue as the only means to achieving happiness. And so they broke with Aristotle. Aristotle said, yeah, you need virtue, but you need a couple other things too, like, some material possessions and et cetera, et cetera. But the Stoics, and you don't have to buy into everything with Stoicism, by the way, but they believe that virtue in and of itself was the only thing necessary for happiness.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, I think, and I have another friend of mine I've been speaking about this with. He recently I sent him an audio book version of Meditations, and he started listening to it. And I don't think he's really on the same page with me about some things, but it's been a good conversation. I mean, going back to what you just spoke of, I mean, one of the things in Ryan Holiday's books, in one of his, I think it's his first book, The Obstacle is the Way, he's talking about, understanding what is a bad situation, what is a good situation. He's basically like, well, there's no such thing as a good or a bad situation. Objectively, there is how we perceive the situation. There's how our gut tells us, and then there's how we can change it. And I think for a lot of people that, we're getting into higher ideals there. But it's been really strange because I did not think that, and, like anything new, people want to start talking about things. I shared some quotes by Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, and it's really funny when people start to just pick at things, because I had some folks that I went to Liberty University with, and they're like, the Stoic philosophy itself is, it's just not, a lot of the principles are not founded in biblical truth and all this other stuff. And I'm like, wait a second, didn't St. Augustine, didn't he credit the Stoics in some of his lectures?
There was a lot of I'm a Roman Catholic, and I'll always be a Roman Catholic, and I don't find the practice of Stoic ethics to be in conflict with my faith. I think the two can live in harmony quite easily.
I mean, they're not one's not trying, one is a religion, one has a worldview. There's no real worldview to Stoicism other than just a mindset of approach to the everyday struggles of life. And I mean, I may have been wrong. I think it may have been.
You could get into the Stoics had a comprehensive philosophy, and they did deal with what they called physics, and that to them meant metaphysics, really, in our philosophical terminology. I
mean, in Meditations alone, and the first part where Marcus is crediting everyone, he's crediting the gods. The guy was still he had his own, Hellenistic, I don't know, Zeus and all that stuff. He credits Mars for some things, but I have picked this up over the years. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, the Methodists, they found a lot of their inspiration from the Stoics, and a lot of people have picked it up over the years. I don't understand why, some people try and think, oh, you can never take from one to build the other, because then you're building an inconsistent worldview and stuff.
It's not true, because I will point them to Cicero. A lot of the latter Romans that we were just talking about, like Marcus Aurelius, really looked up to their great Roman heroes of the past, and those usually were the great republicans that ironically fought against the emperors, or the original emperor anyway. And so Marcus Aurelius mentions Cato the Younger, who is probably the epitome of the Stoic, and took his own life because he refused to allow himself to be used as propaganda.
I'm not pro-suicide, but that is so metal.
Julius Caesar, yeah. It's a great story, and he was the last holdout after the Republican army lost under Pompey the Great, lost to Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus. Cato the Younger leads about 10,000 of the last remnants of the Republicans to northern Africa, to Utica, to hold out and carry on the resistance. And I'll make a long story short. Caesar later lands with like 8 legions, and so outnumbers them, 6-1. And one of the other guys at the camp who outranked Cato the Younger, a guy named Metellus, I can't remember, some Roman. He foolishly went out and thought he could beat Caesar in a pitched battle, and was destroyed. So all the guys were destroyed, and Cato the Younger has a few hundred guys left inside the walls, and he doesn't want to see any suffering come to the civilians. He evacuates the civilians, and a family member approaches him on Caesar's behalf and says, "Hey, Caesar just wants you to," basically just says, Caesar just wants you to bend the knee. He's going to let you go back to the Senate, and you can rail and give speeches galore against Caesar and carry on your own political opposition. But he just wants you to bend the knee, kiss the ring, essentially. And that's it. That's all you got to do, and it's over. And Cato basically, his response is tell Caesar that tyrants have no legitimate authority to grant pardon. He was going to pardon him, and he says tyrants have no legitimate authority to pardon me, and there's nothing to pardon, for I have not done any wrong. He is the one that destroyed the Roman Constitution. So then Cato, I think he reads Plato's famous dialogue, the Phaedo.
How long did they allow him to talk?
Yeah. No, it was later that night. He has supper with his family. He goes back up to his room, his quarters, and he reads Plato's dialogue on Socrates. Socrates is talking in that dialogue about the immortality of the soul. And so then Cato draws his sword, and then a servant actually runs in and tries to stop him, and Cato punches the servant in the face, breaks his hand. So then he can't grip this. This is all from Plutarch's biography, right?
This is so much more interesting than the tragedy of Cato the Younger when you just read it verbatim. Keep going.
Oh yeah. So he can't grip the sword as well now because his hand's broken. So he stabs himself through. He runs himself through, but the wound's not fatal. So he slumps over and passes out, and his family rushes in. They're like, "Oh my gosh, what? Dad's all messed up." So
what are you doing? Why is his hand broken?
It gets better. They get the surgeon in. The surgeon's like stitching him up, putting his intestines back in. Apparently, I don't know. And then Cato comes to, sees what's happening, and throws him off, and then tears open the wound and tears his guts out to make sure that he dies.
That is
so it's a little gruesome, and the guy might have been a little bit over the top, but the point is that he knew Caesar would really parade him around because he was looked to in Rome as the most principled guy on the Republican side. And if he was captured and he accepted a pardon, Caesar would use it as propaganda that he's merciful, and that was sort of Caesar's tactic. The Republicans, their tactic was, hey, we are the true heirs of what's right. We have honor on our side. We have the unwritten Constitution on our side and virtue on our side. Caesar's tactic was, I've been wronged, but even though I've been so wronged, I'm willing to grant my enemies mercy. It's all propaganda, right? So anyway, Cato wasn't going to allow that. So I really like Cato the Younger, but so these guys look to him. They also look into Cicero, and Cicero was Cato's buddy. But Cicero wasn't a true practicing Stoic. He actually was what was called an academic skeptic. It was sort of what had become of Plato's philosophy.
So kind of a dick.
Yeah. But he was sympathetic.
We gotta bring things down to a fifth grade level for me sometimes.
Yeah. Well, he was sympathetic to Stoicism, and he was a lot of his famous works had Stoic themes in them. So he was eclectic. So he would pick and choose, but he really liked Stoic ethics a whole lot. And he actually said in one case, okay, if I wasn't an academic skeptic, I would be a Stoic. So he does say that towards the end of his life. But all these guys, Marcus Aurelius, look to these guys. They're kind of like we would look to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and those types. Patrick.
I mean, those guys itself. I mean, just tying into Cato, like they were reading the Cato letters, which were all published anonymously, espousing this, traditional Republican virtue. And I mean, going back to Marcus, because he's really been the one that I've been focusing a lot on recently, like, just with everything you spoke about, like that's some incredible foreshadowing, because, going back to his friend who was the top general of the legions, when I don't know why or if it was an intentional coup. I haven't gotten to that part yet, but, when Marcus hears that basically everyone thinks he's dead and that this guy is saying he's the emperor, like that was usually a death notice for everyone. Typically when you did that type of shit, and we even see this now in some banana republics, like you kill everyone's family, no bloodline. So there's no like Shakespearean revenge later, like you're done, even if it was, misconception or confusion or something. But, Marcus, he could have just been like, wow, this bastard just betrayed me. I'm going to kill him. Instead, he's like, this is a really good opportunity. That whole how do I assess the situation thing. This is a really good opportunity for me to show the people of Rome, and this is something I deeply admire about him. And we could look at the context of the times and how we would apply our own modern viewpoint on it. But like I do genuinely think he really, really loved his people in a way that so few leaders in history ever have. And he wanted to show them how a peaceful transition of power should be. So what happens when Marcus gets his boys and they're about to go tell this dude, okay, we need to have a conversation about him? The guy kills himself. He kills himself. And then what does Marcus do? Marcus weeps because he did not have the chance to make something good of this situation.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. Yeah, and the Stoics, they
I probably would have killed the guy.
Well,
perfect.
A Stoic philosophy will tell you that you need to, make sure you are making the most of every moment and assessing how you can demonstrate virtue. And virtue just doesn't mean doing what's right. It means pursuing excellence, really, in a broad sense to the Greeks and to the later Romans. And so, yeah, they would tell you every situation you come upon, you can always demonstrate virtue. And Seneca has a great quote about it: "Is never is a man barred from virtue, regardless of where he's at." I can't remember the exact quote, but yeah. And so, what would be in any situation? What would be the right course of action, and how could you demonstrate the most amount of virtue in that given situation? And I guess to relate it to the earlier point, relate this concept here to the earlier point you were bringing up about how some people might see it as Stoic philosophy is contradictory to Christianity. It's Stoic philosophy very much ingrained the four cardinal virtues into Western civilization. Plato had written about the virtues, and so did Aristotle. Stoics took those virtues and really made them the core force in ethics in Western in the Western tradition. And Christianity, like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas to a later extent, they integrated the virtues.
I got to stop real fast. Who wrote City of God?
That's Augustine, right?
That's okay. So I was thinking of the right person. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Please continue.
Yeah. Augustine, however you want to say it, but yeah. So virtue ethics, really, though. I mean, it was definitely Plato was pretty much the prime driving force on virtue ethics originally, but the Stoics really made a case of it, and I think you can look back and see that there's a lot of harmony between Christianity and Stoic ethics. Interestingly, Dante, who was, by all accounts, nobody could deny that Dante wasn't a Christian. He, in his Divine Comedy, establishes Cato the Younger. He's one of the few pagans that's honored in his Divine Comedy. So Cato the Younger is charged with guarding the gates of purgatory in his Divine Comedy there. So there's definitely some harmony, and the early Christians definitely looked to some of these Greek philosophers and to those famous Romans as good examples that you could still learn from, even though they weren't Christians. These people lived before the time of Christ. So,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, the one thing that I have had to really, because, philosophy is only good if you apply it to yourself. And the one thing that, and I was a raging Ayn Rand objectivist for a while. I still read The Fountainhead once a year. I like it as a book. There's a lot of things that, I think everybody should read Ayn Rand, because it's all her books force you to ask yourself how you would approach really shitty circumstances. And she really makes you question parts of your worldview and your belief system that you may have never thought of. So I think as an exercise in understanding where you stand on things, I think everyone should read her just for the benefit of that, regardless of where you land on it. But the one thing that, because I read somewhere, I think it was the Ayn Rand Institute, they actually wrote an article. Actually, it's funny. When you Google Stoicism, it's actually one of the first sponsored ads on Google. And it's basically like why objectivists should not like Stoicism. And I read it because I'm like, I wonder what they're going to bitch about. And I mean, the thing about objectivism is ultimately it's hardcore determinism. It's you are what you are, and that's just it. What really made Stoicism something that I'm really trying to incorporate in more of my life, and why I think it really is consistent with not just, my libertarian beliefs and my Christian worldview, is I could really sum it up to one word: pursuit. Every other, fad, every other mindset movement that comes and goes with the sands of time, they all tell you to become. They all tell you to be something. What Christianity and what Stoicism do is they're always telling you to do one thing: pursue. You can never be perfect. You can never be the absolute example of what a good, righteous man should be, but you should always be in pursuit of that. And as long as you do that with a whole heart, that is the most anyone can ask of you.
Yeah. I would, that's a good way to look at things. That's a good philosophy to have, value to have, especially in the world of growing nihilism that you were alluding to earlier, where people don't have purpose, or they feel like they don't have purpose, or they're taught that implicitly maybe that life has no meaning. There are a lot of people out there, I think, in search of purpose. And for me, first off, it's my Roman Catholic faith. But here on Earth, how do we find our purpose? How do we apply ourselves in a purposeful meaning every day? And it is pursuit of for me, it's pursuit of virtue. Yeah.
So. To kind of toss this back at you, do you think you could be the statesman you are today if you did not practice Stoic virtue in your life? Do you think you would be better, worse? Where do you see that if that was divorced of you right now?
I have to credit the Stoic philosophy for my friends they've joked in the past, and they've said, you may be the first Irish Stoic. So, because, the Irish are known for a lot of things, and one of them, one of the stereotypes happens to be, they're not very good with patience and with moderation on your temperament. So, I had an Irish temper in my youth. And so that's one thing that Stoic philosophy has really helped me out with a whole lot, has been to focus on patience, to focus on temperance, self-control. And that's really key in a lot of circumstances in the legislature, where, especially if you're a libertarian leading legislator, where the seat of power isn't look at people like that very fondly. It teaches you a whole lot. The Stoic philosophy can teach you a whole lot in those sorts of situations. To just focus on what you can control and to understand where other people are coming from, especially when you could have perceived them as wronging you. They might be wronging you, by the way, but try to understand where they're coming from. And, one thing I usually do in my head is say, well, this is just a person that's ignorant and they really don't understand much of anything else. So, why should I be so upset with this guy? So,
I get where you're coming.
The only thing I will say about that is sometimes you do need to be hard on other guys. And it doesn't mean, drop your defenses and just be passive about things. When other individuals in the legislature that I know the truth, are smart enough to understand the truth, have reached the truth, yet repeatedly refuse to exercise the truth. That's something that I have a hard time forgiving.
Oh yeah, I mean, going back. I've been looking a lot at the plague, at the 13-year plague, because just talk about timing, where we can really see that history might not repeat itself, but certainly does rhyme. I think Marcus says one of the most terrifying nights he ever slept through was the night after he announced that he was going to do an audit of all state bureaucrats. And he was like, okay, we need to start putting money towards the people who are dying in the streets. Rome looks like a graveyard instead of a city. So I need to make sure that money's being spent, and people lost their shit about that. And there's a guy who's fighting, he's fighting Germanic Gaul tribes. He's fighting everybody. This is a dude who, when he says the most terrifying night is when he said he was going to audit his own politicians. That's certainly something a lot of people can relate to. But yeah. I am just curious. I've had the weird displeasure of meeting far too many politicians, whether they be dog catchers or governors, and a lot of them really try and show their credentials, and they want you to think that they have at least, something between the ears. But I think a lot of them are just actually really dumb people. Do other representatives in the legislature ever come up and, have they ever struck up a conversation like, hey, I don't understand where you're coming on with this. What's this whole Stoicism thing? Have they ever actually been slightly curious about it? Because you're open about this stuff. I've heard some of your speeches, and it's not like you're hiding where your inspiration for some of your motives come with this.
Sometimes, yeah, there are some guys that are curious, and those are the guys that you really want to get into some conversations with, because those are the guys that I think might have a little spark inside them that they want to aspire to something more than just going to all the receptions and eating the gourmet food and taking the lobbyist cash and stuff like that. So those are the guys, if they come up to you and they ask about some philosophy, for heaven's sake, or even just some of those ideas, inkling of his ideas, then you want to go ahead and try to, maybe develop a relationship or try to at least have more in-depth conversations with. Some of the people there are just so far gone that it's no, they'll probably look at you like you're crazy. Like, this guy's an idiot.
Oh,
why,
yeah. I mean,
I would even be doing this kind of thing. He just doesn't get it. So there are some people that are lost. It doesn't mean you treat them terribly. You don't treat them bad, but at all. But I mean, you don't want to dedicate a lot of time on those guys. But yeah, I mean, there's some people that come up, and I will note the guys and the gals that are the newbies, the freshmen, especially on the Republican side. Yeah, I guess maybe some on the Democratic side, but it seems to be more on the Republican side, because
I would think that anybody who aspires for any type of public office, regardless as to where they fall ideologically wise, they all think they're at the start, at least, they all think they're there to do something good for the sake of others.
Yes, that's what I was getting at.
So that's a fair statement, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's just I think there are some qualities or some properties to what we would call left-wing thought versus more right-wing thought that are more agreeable to some of the things that we're talking about now. So I think on the right, there are a lot of people that are more focused on maybe hard truths, right? Versus on the left, it just more focused on a more utilitarian, benevolent, compassionate, I just don't want to hurt feelings sort of equality type attitude. Which, when someone, I'm not faulting that right off the get-go. If that's all you have been exposed to other things, then, it's not your fault. But I'm just saying, it's been my experience where new freshman legislators that come in, especially on the Republican side, they didn't sign up to be told just to go along with the party apparatus and do as they're told. And that's what they find out. The party leaders say, hey, listen, this is the deal. Vote with the party. You get rewarded. Don't vote with the party. If you dissent or dare to go along with those who do, you will be punished, but when they see people that stand up and talk about these things that are related to truth, they say, I want to be like those guys. I don't, there is that, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. They don't always come along with you, but there is that spark at first. And that's really where you got to dig on that one virtue called courage. And if they can utilize that, then you could definitely overcome the party apparatus, the punishment, the establishment's tools with this philosophy. Sometimes you can break through to people.
I mean, for me, the years that I thought, okay, if I just do the right thing, if I work for the right people, if I do all this stuff, I'm going to have my own, staffer job, and then maybe one day I'll run for something, and I'll have my own, Mr. Whatever goes to Washington moment, Mr. Smith goes to Washington moment. And I've seen a lot of people like me take a few steps forward, and you always have the good cases and you have the bad cases. And I obviously went a different path. They say if you don't succeed in politics, go into journalism. And if journalism doesn't work out, organized crime is very lucrative. But it's definitely one of those things where it's, I don't know. I want to believe that people have good intentions, but how those intentions are played out are just sometimes they really screw people over. And I mean, one thing I like, I know we're running close on time. I'll try not to monologue about this. One thing I do notice about Ryan Holiday, and folks, I mean, Daily Stoic, I listen to the Daily Stoic podcast every day. I read Conspiracy by Ryan Holiday. The Obstacle is the Way. I mean, I think in terms of modern people really kind of pushing it online, he's the person you're going to want to, go check out. But the one thing I will say I've noticed about Ryan Holiday is that he is probably a bit more of a left bent person. And then you really look at the people that he really talks about in terms of being in the world of politics, and he brings up two examples of people that really kind of, I don't really like: Barack Obama and Abraham Lincoln. Now, he makes some points where, okay, I can see where he's making some objective observations about them. I get it. I'm not going to say I don't like Ryan Holiday because he's a totalitarian, liberal and all this other stuff. But that's the one thing I've noticed about him. But, I looked into his examples of, Lincoln practicing Stoicism. And I was like, I think we can find another example. And to kind of keep it in the Civil War realm, one thing, being a good Virginian, I know is, what happened to Robert E. Lee after the Civil War. I think how we treat the people we defeat often says more about us than it does about them. And Lincoln, through all his faults, I will say that the one thing that he did that I don't think anybody else in his position, especially others in the Republican Party at the time, did was he said, we're going to go ahead and bring them back into the Union, and we're going to treat them like citizens. We're going to treat Confederate soldiers as veterans. We're going to bring in some of the people that rebelled against us back into the Senate. And then he got shot. But, you look at Robert E. Lee when he, they took his land. Arlington Cemetery was the Lee property. And he was broke. He never got his citizenship back until like the 70s. Somebody found a note. I think it was either Ford or Carter that actually made Robert E. Lee a U.S. citizen again. But years later, after he was the president of Washington University, now Washington Lee University, somebody asked him about, would you ever do it again? Are you mad? Or do you get upset? Are you depressed about this? You look like shit. What's going on with you? And, I don't know if he was a practicing Stoic, but the one thing he said, which is definitely a Stoic type of saying, was, all I can do is do what I can do now and every other day. My main task at hand is to be a good citizen and to lift up others. And that itself, to look at a defeated man who is really the symbol of a cause, regardless as to what you think of him, folks, that says something. And if I can say something nice about Lincoln, who I don't like, I think if you're not a big fan of Robert E. Lee, you can at least credit him with that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because on the Confederate memorial in Arlington Cemetery, or near Arlington Cemetery anyway, there's an inscription at the base of it that's a famous line from Lucan's famous book on the Civil Wars, and it says, though the winning cause pleased the gods, the losing cause pleased Cato. And that's what they had inscribed on the Confederate memorial, which wouldn't be too far away from Lee's original.
I gotta go find that. I never knew about that.
Yeah.
I've lived here for like 14 years. I never knew about that.
Yeah.
I gotta check that out.
So but anyway, yeah, I don't know. Holiday's assessment of Lincoln and Barack Obama being Stoics, I guess I don't know. I've never read in detail what he says, but I would venture to guess he's more or less going off appearances and how they carried themselves and some of those things. But if you look at actual Stoic philosophy and what it says about in the terms of political philosophy, it was the Stoic philosophy that really expounded on natural law. And that of life and property, and you could find that through Cicero's famous book, probably the most famous book in history, next to the Holy Bible, is Cicero's book on duties, and that was the second book off the Gutenberg press, right behind the Holy Bible, and it is written from Stoic ethics. It's on politics, and it, among other things, expounds on, government's role. Government's role should be strictly confined to to protecting life and private property. And so
Lincoln wasn't really good at that part. I think the city of Atlanta has a few words to say.
It wasn't, and it was Cicero that started the just war doctrine, in his On the Republic, which is also has a lot of stoicism in it, So, a war
don't target civilian populations. Just no,
he didn't ever said that. A war launched unprovoked cannot possibly be just. That's a famous line from Cicero, and it's very much in line with Stoicism, what Stoicism teaches. So yeah, I would definitely go. But there's a lot of more left-wing people that are promoting Stoicism, and you'll find that there's a lot of atheists that promote Stoicism, even though the Stoics themselves were not atheists. Most of them were pantheists, but they definitely believed in some sort of higher power.
And I'm cool with that though, because this is gonna sound weird me putting it this way, so just hang on with me. Like, I'm okay with people thinking more about themselves, and by that I mean being more introspective as to how they see themselves. I mean, memento mori, I will die. I probably fucked that paraphrase up too. Like, remember I will die. Like that. For me at the very beginning, that's like, yeah, that's very nihilistic and that's very Nietzschean, and like, I'm not really cool with that. But honestly, when you really think about that, yeah, one day you're not going to be here, but you have every day to try and live and do something, and you should be grateful for that. And when I understood that changed the whole meaning of it.
Oh yeah, sure.
I mean, amor fati, the love of fate. The obstacle in the way is the way. I mean, those are very uplifting things. Ultimately, through this time where a lot of people are going through immense difficulties, my family in Detroit, they were all laid off. I know people who are, they're worried about money. They're worrying about health. In this time where I've had to think, okay, how do I assess my own situation? Yes. Have I been inconvenienced? Yes. Am I happy all the time about this? No. But I can take this time to thrive because I've taken what in my gut reaction was a bad situation, and I've been able to find something good out of it. I will be a stronger person after this than I was before. And that is what is so empowering. Yeah. And if this conversation has shown anything, it's that, hey, I've got a lot more time to read. So
that's great. No, yeah, I'm glad you brought up that Nietzsche. What Nietzsche promoted there, amor fati. I mean, he definitely was trying to borrow some from the Stoics, but what Nietzsche.
Yeah, I mean, when he said God is dead, he wasn't saying that as a celebration. I think this is a giant cultural misunderstanding of that. Like, he wasn't saying God is dead. He was saying God is dead. Like, we are just stuck with ourselves now. And that can either be a good thing or a bad thing. In his mind, it was like, that's a bad thing. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand your point there. Yeah. Yeah. I've never been a huge fan of Nietzsche, but
something about going crazy and throwing shit on the wall just didn't really appeal to me.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been good talking to you. We'll have to do it again at some point.
Absolutely. Pat, if anyone wants to buy your books, reach out to you, pick your brain, how could they do so?
Sure. They could probably the easiest way, if they are interested in Stoicism and they want to buy the last book I wrote was Stoicism in the Statehouse. Just buy that off of Amazon. I think it's you could buy a paperback for $12 or $13. I think the hard copy is like $19, $20, but and if they want to reach out to me, my personal email address is patmcgeehan2014@gmail.com. My last name's spelled McGeehan, patmcgeehan2014@gmail.com, or they can hit me on Facebook. That's easy too.
People, you know how the internet works.
Yeah. So I'm not hard to track down, but
cool.
That's been really good. And you guys, you take care, man.
Yeah, you too. Definitely, especially now and afterwards. Always great talking to you, sir.
Oh, yeah, you too. I'll see you. Bye.
Check out our other shows and more from the We Are Libertarians network at wearelibertarians.com.